this readable from the back? Right. So let's go over a few things that we can do here which are relevant for deployment environments. So first of all, I already mentioned them, it's the catalogs. And this is the link between Dev Center and the actual templates, infrastructure code templates, that live in a GitHub repository, for example. If you say I want to add new, you can see that you get to pick where is actually what's the location of the catalog. Is it Azure DevOps, is it GitHub, or is it Microsoft Quick Start catalog? You then also get to set things like how do I authenticate against this repository, so I could go for a personal access token, for example, or even better, of course, I could use a managed identity to authenticate against the repository. Repositories are normally synced, I think, every day, but you can also do that manually by checking the box and saying sync. So if something new appears in the repository, then it obviously needs to be synced with the system to become available. In environment types, you get to define these types, and like I mentioned, an environment type here on this level is actually nothing more than a name and adding one or two tags. Later on in the project, they get a bit more value. But it can be really useful to be able to set tags here, which are then applied to any environment being deployed of this type. And last but not least, on this level, we have the projects. Like I mentioned, there's probably always a one-on-one relation between a project and a team. So if we dive into a project, you can again see that as the catalog. In this project, I did not add one, but if you have specific infrastructure that's only to be used by this specific team, this specific project, you can add one here. But the most interesting stuff in a project happens here, where you create the environment types for this specific project. When you do that, you link it up to one of the environment types that lives in the Dev Center. And I've already done that. There were 3 in my Dev Center, so there are 3 here. So I'm done with that action. It needs to have a link. I can't add anymore because I've linked all the environment types on the Dev Center level. If we then look at what you can do here, is that let's first hit edit on my test environment. You can see that first of all, you need to give it a subscription. So it means that when someone starts deploying a project into the test environment, this is the subscription to which it will be deployed. You then get to define the identity that actually does the deployment. So here I'm saying I want to have this managed identity being used to do the deployment. So I think this is very nice because now there's a separate identity with each environment. So I can be very general in what permissions do I assign to what specific environment. And this is also the identity that I can then use from my GitHub Actions pipeline, for example, to deploy into this environment. But what you also can do is you can tell what permissions should the identity get that actually does the deployment. So if it's GitHub Action that does the deployment, then the identity of GitHub Action will, in this case, become a contributor on whatever was deployed. But if it's me doing the deployment from the dev portal or from the CLI, then it's me getting the contributor permissions so that I then can later on make additions, modifications to it if I want to. I can also set additional actions. So you can, for example, say I want my engineers to have contributor permissions, and I want my test engineers, for example, to be a reader on these newly created environments so that they can access that. And you can imagine that since this is a test environment, I allow people to be contributor, but on a production environment, you would probably never do that, and you would say you get to be a reader at most. So you can specify that per environment. Then another thing that you can do here is do a bit of access control on a very specific environment. So what you see here, for example, is that, well, first of all, it's a bit of a mess in my tenant, but it's a different story. What you can do is you can say, who is the deployment environment user on this specific environment? And what you can do with that is that you can say, me, for example, I can create an environment of type test, but I don't have this permission on the production environment. So I, as a person, cannot create a production environment. That always has to go through a GitHub pipeline. And then you will probably see such an app having permissions on the production environment. So you can very nicely set who gets the permission to deploy what type of environment in what project, really on the environment level. Alright, so that's what needs to be set before an engineer can actually get started. And then when engineers start deploying environments, you can see them here. It takes a while to load, but then you get an overview of the environments that were deployed inside of this project, and if they are successful or not. If they are not successful, you can dig into the logs. You can see what type of environment that is. You can see to what resource group in Azure that was deployed, if there are any advisor recommendations, and what the costs are. But I would love, in terms of cost, etc., I would love to see what it would cost right here, and I would also like to see a total probably, because if I want to know what this thing will cost, I need to click here, and it actually goes into the resource group. It doesn't even go into the pricing pane in the resource group. So I think they can add a thing or two to make that experience a bit better. But at least it's easy to drill into. And what you also see, I didn't use that here in my demo yet, but there's also an expiry that you can set. So I can say on a deployment on a piece of infrastructure, I can set the expiration, and then it will be automatically removed when that time hits. And I think that's very useful that if you create a new dev environment or a new test environment, that it will be automatically clean up after you in for example, a day.